You're about to listen to a BBC podcast, and trust me, you'll get there in a moment. But if you're a comedy fan, I'd really like to tell you a bit about what we do. I'm Julia Mackenzie, and I commission comedy podcasts at the BBC. It's a bit of a dream job, really. Comedy is a fantastic, joyous thing to do because really you're making people laugh, making people's days a bit better, helping them process all manner of things. But, I also know that comedy is really subjective and everyone has different tastes. So we've got a huge range of comedy on offer, from satire to silly, shocking to soothing, profound to just general prattling about. So if you fancy a laugh, find your next comedy at BBC Sounds.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Podcast, here to bring you up to speed with everything in the national game as we hurtle into another hectic weekend. It's Friday the 1st of March. I'm Martin Dowden. And coming up today,
it wouldn't be great from a club perspective, obviously, to dismiss another manager quite so swiftly. But right now, the trajectory is kind of going in one direction, and that's incredibly concerning.
As the interim Aberdeen boss prepares to face St Mirren and Paisley, is it already time for Warnock to wave goodbye? At the other end of the table,
it's Tavernier who goes for it. It's in! James Tavernier! Oh, here's a cross and it's in! Alistair Johnston's cross. Adam Ida heads home. He is on fire!
Can Celtic keep up the pressure on Rangers as both sides face tricky tests this weekend? And
Jordan White in! And Jordan White rolls the ball into the back of the net!
Can Ross County and St Johnstone pull further away from Livy at the bottom? I'm joined today by the former Rangers, Falkirk and Dundee striker Rory Loy, and Thomas Duncan, BBC Sports Scotland journalist and commentator, and my colleague no less. Guys, welcome to the programme. Rory, what are you looking forward to most this weekend?
I think this time of the season there's so much to look forward to, whether it's the battle at the top, the battle for top six, or the relegation battle, which is now including some teams who maybe never expected to be involved. So look, there's so much to cover in terms of the excitement over the weekend, and the last few weeks have just added to that. Midweek was fantastic as well. So I think it'd be difficult to put your finger on one thing, but I have to say it is nice to have a really competitive title race for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, it is indeed. Thomas, what's tickling your fancy?
Well, I'm probably contractually obliged to say Hibernian and Ross County on Saturday, and then obviously Hearts Celtic on Sunday, because I'm covering both of those for work. So, but they are both intriguing. Hibs County, both sides turned a corner in recent weeks, so who can continue that as Hibs obviously try and squeak into the top six, County trying to pull away at the bottom, and then Tynecastle on Sunday is tasty. Obviously Celtic, that'll be a really stern test of their title credentials after they seem to rediscover their best against Dundee midweek. So yeah, those two for me.
Well, lots to get through with both of you, but before all that, let's whiz through the latest Scottish football headlines. Celtic defender Cameron Carter-Vickers says his side have to win all remaining 10 Premiership fixtures to retain the title as they travel to Tynecastle this weekend. The Rangers keeper Jack Buckland has said his side needed to hear the boos from fans earlier this season to get back on track. Former Aberdeen striker Billy Dodds has told the BBC the Dons could be in a relegation fight, and says he's got a knot in his stomach as he's seen this movie before. St Mirren say the Scottish FA's referee department agrees VAR should have recommended an on-field review of the decision not to give them a penalty at Ross County on Tuesday. And it's a huge game at both ends of the table in the Championship this evening as Arbroath host Raith Rovers. That match is live on Sportscene on the BBC Scotland channel from 7:30.
The Scottish Football Podcast.
OK, let's start with Aberdeen. Another defeat on Wednesday night, 2-0 at home to St Johnstone. That's 5 league games without a win for Neil Warnock. Rory, fans not happy at all at Pittodrie. Warnock said they won't win another game this season if the form continues. What do you make of all of this?
Well, when Neil Warnock was first appointed, there was a lot of opinions. It seemed there was a lot who were very happy about it, and there was a lot who were extremely unhappy about it. There didn't seem to be any middle ground. Whereas I think I was the only person that was in that middle ground. I wasn't quite sure. I thought I had good potential, but it's been a disaster. And see, listening to Neil Warnock, he's either been told the wrong information by the club when he's spoken to them, or he completely misunderstood the remit. I think the clubs he's been at previously, he's been told, you need to go in and keep us in the league. That, in my opinion, shouldn't have been and wouldn't have been the remit at Aberdeen. It would have been, right, pushes into the top six If we can nick fourth, then great, but the form needs to be that of one that could potentially get us into fourth position in the league. And Neil Warnock even spoke of that when he first came in. Now, it has been shambolic from day one. I covered the game down at Rugby Park a couple of weeks ago. He was saying how Kilmarnock were favourites. You look at the league table, it doesn't matter what the league table says. With a squad like Aberdeen have got, they should be going to Kilmarnock, and they within their own dressing room, at the very, very least, should be expecting to win. The fans will be going down expecting to win. He's created a culture and a mindset where it is scrapping for survival. If you put the players in that mindset, that's where they'll end up. And that's exactly what's happening just now. I think he thought he would come up here and it would be a breeze. He'd get the best out of the players and they would go on and they would be absolutely fine. And I think I don't personally think, from listening to him and watching Aberdeen a couple of times, think he's taking the job seriously enough. And I think he's now realising, right, I think I've bitten off more than I can chew here.
Yeah, strong words. I was at Kilmarnock with you that day. I interviewed Neil Warnock both pre and post match. And given what I saw, I have to say, if I was an Aberdeen fan, I would be very concerned, more so after that.
Should have been at least 4-0 that day, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And after the St Johnstone game as well. I mean, Thomas, from your eyes, where do you think it's going wrong?
I think, well, maybe Rory can speak to this as a player, but I think everyone raised an eyebrow. It seems almost every interview he's saying, we've got to work with what we've got. He kind of refers to players as they a lot. Is kind of very, very critical of their performances. And you could easily sit and say, well, he's right. You could maybe say the things you're saying is correct. Maybe you could argue they're not. But I don't know if it's the wisest to be almost throwing the players that you've got to work with from now to the end of the season under the bus in every interview that you're doing. That's how it comes across. Now, maybe he's just hoping for a reaction and maybe he'll get it. I mean, at Huddersfield, for example, last year, I think he only won one of his first 7 in charge, and then they went on to win 6 of their last 9 and only lost one of those. So back at Rotherham in 2016, when he also took charge in February, he didn't win any of the first 3 and then went on an 11-game unbeaten run. So I suppose you definitely can't count some sort of reaction out yet, but I think myself and Rory have watched a lot of Aberdeen this season. We obviously covered them away in Europe, and apart from those games in Europe where Barry Robson had a shape to work with, where they were solid to beat and then used the ball pretty well on the counter-attack at times, in the league domestically that didn't translate and there was no real discernible style of play, and that actually hasn't changed at all. And I think it was Willie Miller who said midweek that he maybe didn't know the players, know the league. That's how it comes across. And I think from Aberdeen's point of view, they can only really hope that these first 5 games he's got to know the players and that he can maybe come up with some sort of system, some sort of discernible style of play that they can take them into the final sort of 10 games, because if they don't, then they are going to be in real trouble and they're going to be relying on the individual quality that they have to get them out of trouble, which I don't think often works.
I watch Aberdeen and it's almost like they're going through a pre-season with the manager in terms of the shape, in terms of the team selection. Now that's why pre-season's there. For, you get 6 weeks of trying different shapes, different formations, different players in different positions, and you go into the first game of the season with what you believe is your best. Now, given when Neil Warnock comes in, you can't afford to do that, but that's what he's done. He doesn't have the courage of his convictions. He changes his shape in game. He changes players' positions. Players play out position. He's thrown Bojan Miovski under the bus for one mistake all season. It's just been a disaster. A disaster, you see. Let's hear the thoughts of Aberdeen fan and the host of the ABZ podcast, Gary Scott.
The performance and the result on Wednesday night are just both, really, really poor. It's 5 games in the league now, no wins, 3 defeats and 2 draws. It's very, very worrying. I wasn't convinced by the appointment of Warnock to begin with. I could understand why it happened, and it, on one hand, it made some sense. I think what we were all expecting to see with Warnock was that he has this aura of being a really good man manager and being able to get the best out of a set of players who are maybe lacking that bit of confidence. Don't think we've seen that to date, and perhaps it's gone the other way. He's not been shy about slagging off the team and certain individuals in the media. Perhaps back in the day you could get away with that, but I'm not entirely sure with the modern day player that pans out the way that the manager maybe expects. So that's surprising from that perspective. And at the moment, every year in the Premiership there seems to be one team who goes on a slide at this time of the season, and it seems never ending. And at the moment it's Aberdeen who are on that slide, and it's difficult to see how we pull ourselves out of it just now. Right now, I'd be okay with the idea about somebody else coming in. I think there's a time and a place for this conversation to take place about the appointment of Warnock on the interim basis. And I think that time and place is now. And if we're going to draw a line under this experiment, it probably needs to happen sooner rather than later. I think dillying and dallying about Barry Robson's future is kind of what got us in this mess in the first place. It wouldn't be great from a club perspective, obviously, to dismiss another manager quite so swiftly. But right now, the trajectory is kind of going in one direction, and that's incredibly concerning.
Incredibly concerning. It's incredible we're even having this conversation just, a matter of weeks after Neil Warnock was appointed. I think a lot of focus at some point is going to go to the board. Maybe that's for another day. But Rory, do you sense that they could actually sack him before the end of the season, given what's taking place here?
I don't think it's that time yet. I think he'll get another good few games in charge. I don't see a scenario other than continuously losing every game until they're in that 11th spot, because Livingston won't catch them. I say that, but you look at St Johnstone, who obviously won up at Aberdeen. Ross County, 4 points from the last 6. Motherwell are now winning games. You look at it and you go, I'm talking as if that's a few weeks away. That could happen in the next couple of weeks. That Aberdeen could be in that 11th spot. But it would be a desperation thing going into the last 5 games after the split, something like that. But again, it's a terrible, terrible look for Aberdeen if they go and sack another manager and have to bring somebody else in, for the simple fact of come in for 5 games and try and get a reaction and pick up a couple of wins to try keep us in the league, which is unbelievable. But they've got a tough game at the weekend. I don't see them taking all 3 points, and they've just got to hope and pray that Neil Warnock can win a couple of games so that they don't have to go through that process again.
Yes, let's move on. Aberdeen away to St Mirren. St Johnstone, who beat them during the week, they've got Livy at home. How do you see that one going, Thomas?
Yeah, it's a huge game. Livingston, it's just time's running out for them, isn't it? But it's hard to call because I've watched a lot of them recently, and they're not playing really terribly. I know it sounds bad to say, but they're just making mistakes in key moments. And I saw the goals the other night against Motherwell. And when you associate Livingston's time in the Premiership, it's always about being difficult to beat and not giving away goals cheaply. And the space that the Motherwell players had in the box, Vale with a header for 3-1, Spittal, I know it's a great finish, but the time he's got in the box, it's just not like the Livingston teams we've seen of old. And I think at the end of the day, if you're going to keep conceding the goals that they have, and they've conceded 48, I think, this season, which is the joint worst in the division, then you're not going to get yourself out of bother, because then you're relying on players to score 2 or 3 a game to win games, and they're just not going to do that. St Johnstone, that was a huge win for them the other night, and they've got some players back. I just really like Dan Phillips and Sven Sprangler in midfield. I think they're good players. I think when they've played together for St Johnstone, which isn't that many times, like 6 times, they've only lost 1 game, and you could see Phillips' influence at Pataudry, just takes the ball, moves it on, and just gives them another dimension, because I think there was maybe some criticism they'd lost 4 straight games, that they're maybe a bit too direct and things. And I think if you've got those two play midfield, it maybe gives you another option, brings maybe Nicky Clark and others into the game. So I actually can't really call it, but I think for Livingston it's probably starting to get to the now or never territory, really.
Sitting on the fence there, Thomas. Rory, Ross County away to Hibs. County obviously encouraged again by what's happening at Aberdeen, no doubt. What did you make of Hibs during the week there, and how do you see that one going?
I think Nick Montgomery will be disappointed that they didn't take all 3 points. It's never easy to win a derby, especially away from home at Tynecastle. But he'll be massively encouraged about what he watched, and it's been a big week for Hibs. When you look back to last weekend, Kilmarnock beating Aberdeen, for me, all but secured their top 6 place. I felt if Dundee won at Easter Road, and they would have. So it was a massive win for Hibs. They're now within touching distance of Dundee. And, Ross County, whilst they've picked up a bit of form, on paper they should be beating Ross County at home, and you'd expect them to. I watched Ross County up at Des. They were well beaten at Dundee, but they've picked up since then. And, you've got to have a chance going there. At the top end of the pitch, there'll be players who can score goals. Brophy, Simon Murray, Jan Danda's a decent player on his day. I don't think he has enough of those days, I've got to be honest, but he can be a decent player on his day, and big pitch like Easter Road might suit him. But I think it'll be tight. But I think Hibs, given their performance over the last couple of weeks, will have just enough to beat Ross County.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.
Let's zoom to the top of the table. Rangers hosting Motherwell on Saturday, albeit that one. Rangers obviously in fantastic form. Motherwell seem to have picked up a little bit recently, gave them a really tough game. The last time they were at Ibrox, it was at that one as well. They certainly did. Thomas, what's impressed you most about this Rangers run under Philippe Clement?
I think a lot. I think obviously the way they've changed the style slightly to be just a bit more direct and get the ball forward quickly. I think Philippe Clement, we were talking about Neil Warnock before, maybe coming in and not knowing what he's dealing with. Philippe Clement strikes me as a guy who's come in and knows what league he's coming into. He knows you have to mix it up. And that's not, I'm not suggesting for a moment they're just hoofing it up the park, but they do get the ball forward really quickly. And also the mentality that he seems to have put in, which was illustrated just perfectly on Wednesday night against Kilmarnock, because quite simply that's the sort of game that Rangers would have dropped points in seasons gone by. I think, maybe aside from obviously the season they won the league and cruised to the league, but where you're down at Rugby Park, it's a night game, you go behind a really informed Kilmarnock team, and Rangers teams in the past just haven't come up with answers, but they did, and they did really well. So I think just kind of those things, and it's a testament to the work they've done that I just don't really see them dropping points against anyone other than potentially Celtic, obviously in the Old Firm games. But outside that, the fact that they're 2 points in front, I don't see them dropping points against anyone else, which is just testament to the way they're going. And I would say the same this weekend. As much as Motherwell have got a lot of quality in their team, Blair Spittler in particular, a herogram for him because he's been sensational. I don't know if there's a better player from striking the ball outside the box than him in the Premiership. He's been absolutely brilliant. He always finds the corner, but I don't see anything other than a Rangers win. I'm
really interested to see how Celtic react after, finally putting in a really strong performance, getting the 7 goals against Dundee. Rory travelling to Tynecastle on Sunday. It's always tricky, as we know. Hearts off the back of maybe a couple of not so great performances. What do you think of that one?
Well, there's a lot of talk about Brendan Rodgers' record at Easter Road before they went there this season. Other than, I know Hearts stopped their unbeaten run during his first spell, but generally speaking, he's got a pretty good record through there. Brendan Rodgers, they always seem to do quite well under him, and I think that'll continue. Hearts going through a little bit of a blip. I mean, it's difficult to say that, and it's a bit harsh. I mean, they get well beaten at the weekend, which wasn't great, and then underperformed on Wednesday, but got a point. I think Celtic will have too much of them. I think they'll take a lot of confidence from that, as you say. I think Yang played exceptionally well the other night, and for me now has to start a few games going forward. Cameron Carter-Vickers back in the team, scoring a goal. Not quite keeping a clean sheet, of course, but it scored 7 goals by that point. I think there was a lot of chat. I don't think from Philippe Clement. I think more from Rangers fans and everyone associated with Rangers in general. Not from the players of Clement. I don't think Clement would allow it, but there was a sense from the fan base of maybe getting a little bit carried away at certain times. Not so much about how well they were doing, because that was completely justified, but how they felt Celtic were underperforming, which they were. But Celtic, for me, aren't going away. I think they've got enough in that squad. A lot of players that have won titles before. Brendan Rodgers has won many a title up in Scotland, so I think Celtic will win the match. And I disagree with Thomas slightly. I think it's all good and well winning games just now, but when you get into that split and there's 2 points in it, it's squeaky bum time, as they say. And sometimes the experience of having won a trophy before in a league title can pay dividends, and Rangers will need to work as hard as they can mentally to try and keep winning games when it comes to that point in the season, with European games to work with as well.
It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how it all unfolds at the very top and also the very bottom. Just a quick side note on Celtic. I just think back to the transfer window and how underwhelmed Celtic fans were. Adam Ida was coming in, and look what he's delivered since he's come on. An absolutely fantastic performance from him. But that's all we've got time for. Many thanks to both you, Rory Loy and Thomas Duncan, and thank you for listening. You can see our Arbroath v Raith Rovers live on Sportscene on the BBC Scotland channel from 7:30 tonight. Sports Sound on BBC Radio Scotland will have all the live action for you across the weekend, and Sports Scene will have all the highlights on Saturday, Sunday and Monday nights. Jonathan Sutherland, Ryan McGowan and Scott Allen will be here on the Scottish Football Podcast on Monday morning. So if you haven't done so already, just follow and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.
The Scotland Rugby Podcast is now available every Tuesday. Join me, Andy Burke and Tom English. Just head to BBC Sounds and subscribe to the Scotland Rugby Podcast.
It's just seismic stuff.
There's bucket hats as well.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Is this a rugby podcast or is this a fashion podcast?
Why can't it be a bit of both?
Rugby. Let's get on to rugby.
There's a lot to be excited about.
Today's guest, John McGuigan.
Clubs are at the absolute bedrock of everything Scottish rugby's about.
The Rugby Sports Sound Podcast from BBC Radio Scotland.
You cannot help but be so excited.
It's going to be the centre of the rugby universe.
BBC Sounds.